yourself this afternoon, and then couldn't get into Teams and was waiting for a verification code to be sent down. So I'm really, really sorry about that. Always the way, isn't it? Technology, great until it goes wrong. Okay, so let's get started. Welcome everyone to this first virtual meeting of the Southwark Brexit panel. I think the last time we met in Tooley Street, so it's been quite a while since we've met. So before the meeting starts, I've got some housekeeping announcements to make. This meeting will be recorded and it will be downloaded on YouTube so that the public can access it, because we did have a request from a member of public of whether they could join it or not. So we're going to be recording this evening. So to ensure that the meeting runs smoothly, now that everybody has been in, only one individual will be allowed to speak at a time. Any person speaking must be permitted to finish before what they're saying without interruption. And if I request that an individual stop speaking, they should do so immediately. It's important to towards other people by keeping your microphone on mute when someone is speaking, as this ensures everyone's voice and contribution can be heard. Can I ask that all mobile phones that are not used to dial into this meeting can be put onto silent, as open microphones can cause audio feedback. And if you do want to speak, if you can use the little hand button at the top of the screens, and also I'm happy for anyone to use the chat button as well. So thanks for that. We've received apologies from Councillor Alice MacDonald and Danny Edwards. Do we have any other apologies at all? Okay.
No other apologies, Chair.
Thanks, Pina. Okay, and can any members of the panel confirm if you have any interest or dispensations in respect of any items or issues considered at the meeting? If so, just raise your virtual hand, and if not, we can move on to the next item on the agenda. Okay, great. Okay, so because this is our first online meeting, we've had to redo the terms of reference, which was sent out with the papers. Is everybody okay to note and agree that terms of reference, or does anyone have any questions on that at all? Great, so we can agree the terms of reference. And do we agree the minutes of the 4th of February 2020? Now, I know that just myself and David were at that meeting. I'm happy to agree them. David, are you happy to agree them?
Yes, I had a quick look at them. They're not very extensive, so
no.
I don't think we either didn't do very much, or I can't remember now.
It was a quick meeting, I think. I think
it was.
It
was a long time ago. It feels like another lifetime, but yes.
I know.
I'm happy to agree them.
Brilliant. Well, I've got introductions, but I think we're all friends here and we all know each other, don't we? So, and Peter, welcome to the panel.
Actually, I didn't know
to be here.
Okay, let's do a quick introductions then. So, yeah, I'm Stephanie Cryan, Cabinet Member for Jobs, Culture and Skills, and Brexit falls under my portfolio. I'm going to go on my screen. Maria, do you want to introduce yourself?
Thank you, Stephanie. Is Councillor Maria Linford Hall St George's Ward, member of the Brexit panel.
Thanks. David?
I'm Councillor David Nags. I'm a Borough and Bankside Ward Councillor.
Thanks. Paul?
Good evening. Paul Dumker. I'm responsible for registrars, coroners and information governance, and the registration service provides the ID verification service for the EU settlements scheme.
Great, thanks, Paul. Matt.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Matt. I'm from the Policy and Public Affairs team in External Affairs.
I'm Matt. And Anya.
Hello, Anya Gallagher, Cabinet and Public Affairs Manager.
And Stephen Douglas.
Good evening. I'm Stephen Douglas, Director of Communities at Southwark Council.
And Stephen Gaskell.
Hello, I'm Stephen Gaskell, Director of Response and Renewal at Southwark Council.
And Councillor Peter John.
Councillor Peter John, Councillor for Champion Hill Ward.
And Poonam.
Hello, I'm Poonam Patel, the clerk for this evening.
Okay, and we've not heard from Councillor Lehman at all, whether he's going to be late or give us a
here.
I'm here.
Oh, sorry, Richard. You're not on my screen. Richard, do you want to introduce yourself? Sorry.
Yeah. Hello, sorry, I'm on my mobile because Teams is playing silliness for me. So yeah, Councillor Leeming, Dulwich Village Ward, the ward in Southwark which had the highest turnout and vote for Remain in all of Southwark.
And Richard, welcome as well to the panel as a new member.
Thank you.
as well. Great, that's brilliant. So the first main substantive item on the agenda is our Brexit update report. So Stephen, I'm going to hand over to you to go through this, and then we'll take any questions or comments on that after.
Thank you very much, Steph. Colleagues, I'll keep it relatively brief because I'll make the assumption that everyone has had the opportunity to look through the report. What it does is just set out an update on what activities have been underway since we last met. Obviously, COVID being the thing that has taken up most time and attention, understandably, and that has had an impact on the focus of activity around Brexit and Brexit preparations. I'll ask Anya and Stephen will come in just to add in any further details, and then it may be easier, Chair, to then kind of take questions from the report itself. But what it does is, as I say, set out what activities have been underway as we've moved into this transition period. The big thing being that obviously as negotiations continue, there is still a great deal of uncertainty around exactly what the implications may be for business and how they in effect prepare going into the January period. I know that may sound a little alarming, but it is kind of where we are. That said, there are ongoing negotiations, as we know, between the UK and EU. So, and as that's set out, we should see more details emerge in the days, hopefully ahead, as it were. The paragraph 9 sets out the key areas of critical importance that remain very live and real both now and as we go into the months ahead. I think it's interesting, particularly on the 6th bullet there, that talks about the implications for the local economy post-Brexit, but also how that merges into implications around COVID-19. And that's why, as a council, we've pulled together the economic renewal plan in terms of areas of focus for immediate, short, medium and long-term attention. I'll turn to Stephen and Anya now to just touch very briefly on the work that's been going on in terms of communications and impact on communities. Anya?
Thanks, Stephen. So yeah, as the report sets out, obviously kind of from the last time that the panel met and we sort of discussed the kind of communications around Brexit and the settlement scheme, we've obviously had a big shift in focus around COVID, and that's been obviously the kind of key critical communications issue that we've been focusing on for the last 8 months. But we've continued the messaging that we had been sharing around the EU settlement scheme and encouraging Southwark residents to sign up to that. So that's through the council's usual channels and through kind of social media, through our Southwark Life magazine that goes to every resident in the borough, and the website to try and kind of increase awareness of that. And from the latest data that we've had from government about the number of applications for the settlement scheme, it does look positive in that we've had quite a high number of applications from Southwark residents to the scheme. So we'll obviously continue that messaging throughout this period up until when the scheme closes.
Thank you very much, Anya and Stephen.
Just the only thing I'd add to that is, whilst yeah, very good take up of the scheme, there's still more work to do on that. And of course, Paul is here. That was, of course, impacted by COVID as well, in terms of people seeking face-to-face support with their ID scanning and all that sort of stuff, which wasn't possible because of the pandemic. We did also, through things like the COVID Community Hub, see numbers of people presenting for support who'd not gone through that process, who were citizens of other EU states and had not gone through that process. There's more to do, and as I say, it was impacted by COVID.
Thank you very much, Stephen. And then just to wrap up myself in terms of the report, drawing members' attention to paragraph 18, that as part of the budget setting process for 1920, we did set aside a £2 million risk reserve and a £300,000 commitment. That remains in place, as it were, but obviously the implications of COVID have meant that calls on those funds are yet to be realised. So just to kind of bring that to members' attention. In terms of risk, we have continued to keep Brexit on the risk register, but embedding that into our economic renewal plan as referenced earlier. And then finally, paragraph 19 makes reference to the Shared Prosperity Fund. Since writing, there has been a few more details that have come out on the Shared Prosperity Fund as part of the Chancellor's spending review statement. And that includes that the fund will total around 1.5 billion per year, with the idea that it at least matches current EU receipts. So that's kind of what we've seen in terms of package, with the expectation that focus around employment and skills will feature heavily in relation to use of Shared Prosperity Fund, particularly around skills investment. So again, that might be an area that members may want us to look into and focus efforts on as we move into January and beyond. Chair, I will end there, but I hope that's given a good précis of what we've done today and current live issues.
Thank you everyone for who presented there. It's really quite thorough. And before I open up for discussion or questions, Paul, can I just bring you in, because it'd be really good to hear about the issues that residents trying to get EU settled status are experiencing because of the of COVID restrictions on our registrar services, and sort of, are there any workarounds on that, or have we lobbied government to sort of ease those restrictions at all?
Yes, thank you, Chair. The first issue, or the difficulties that we've experienced around COVID-19 have been, first of all, around service delivery. So when we entered the first lockdown, all of our resources were diverted to registering deaths. When the lockdown was lifted, we had a significant backlog of weddings, civil partnerships and births, and then had to divert resources to recovering those over the summer. And we're now finally in a state where we can consider delivering other services. The challenge for around the settlement scheme and the ID verification is providing that in a socially distanced way. We've tried various processes, changes to the process, but in all cases we end up putting a staff member within 1 meter proximity of a member of the public who cannot wear a face covering or a visor, or that is done through a screen. And following our risk assessment of the service, it hasn't been possible to provide the ID verification service for those reasons. We are still exploring other issues, and we're working with other local authorities to pool ideas and suggestions on how the service can be resumed. We aren't seeing a particularly high demand at the moment. And I expect that the iPhone app was made available towards the end of last year. So many residents have been able to use the self-service option, either on a phone or an iPhone. But demand may pick up as we approach the end of the application process in June. Happy to take any questions.
Right, thanks, Paul. I see, Peter, you've got your hand up.
Yeah, thank you very much indeed, Chair. It was just, I don't know if I've missed it somewhere. I can see the number of people who've applied for settled status. How many do we think are left? Have I missed that number?
That's not something that I would have access to. Perhaps either Stevens may have a view. The difficulty is the total number of applicants exceeds the original Home Office estimates. So it's very difficult to estimate how many are left.
And I think if I could just add to that, Chair, yeah, Paul is absolutely right. It is really difficult to estimate, and it is interesting, and I think it's what we'd suspected, that the numbers exceed who the census and other sources of data tell us is out there. And some of that is to do with people not being recorded, not having reasons to record nationality when people are from another EU state. So it's really difficult to come up with a number.
Okay, I've got a few questions on that as well, but I'll go over first to David and then Maria.
Chair, actually mine's a sort of follow on from that, and it's from Peter's question. I mean, yes, I noticed that the more registrations than we expected. I just wondered, I mean, do we have any thoughts about why that is, apart from, I mean, presumably people have to be, what's the eligibility? People have to, how long do they have to have been in the UK to be eligible to apply? And in regards to the service being suspended, I mean, does that mean literally that, and what is actually happening to people who are trying to still to register? Are they to get their EU settlement? Are they? What are we doing with them exactly? I'm not totally clear on what's happening to them. And is there a deadline that they have to have done that by, or is there no deadline? Thank you.
Chair, shall I pick that up?
Yes, please.
Thank you. The self-service option is still available, and that has been available throughout the pandemic. So an EU national can apply using their own device or using a family member's or a friend's device. It's only the settlement scheme, the ID verification support service, which has been suspended, which was really only for residents who don't have access to a compatible device, who are unable to make use of the self-service option. And during the pandemic, we have received a few inquiries, and we have been able to provide a service, but it is a very clunky and not a slick operation. It is quite time consuming, where we would usually be able to complete the service within 10 to 15 minutes. It's taking upwards of an hour, because each time the device is passed from the staff member to the member of the public, it needs to be cleaned and sanitized, and then when it's handed back, that process needs to be repeated. So it's not a very efficient way, but we have been able to provide a service where we have received inquiries. But as I said before, the demand at the moment does seem to be low, and we aren't receiving that many inquiries. It's really been a handful over the last few months.
Sorry, just I don't know if I can ask just one sort of follow-up, I suppose. I mean, in regards to the numbers, though, to what extent are we allowed to use things like the electoral register and things like that to cross-refer? Are we allowed to do that to try to get a sense of how many people might still not be registered, or does that get hit under GDPR?
Is anyone able to answer that?
Paul, Stephen, are you able to comment on that?
I think that there has been an exercise of looking at the electoral register. Even that's not a perfect source of data, so it doesn't give us a definitive answer to how many people are there, because that's only recording those that are registered, or those that are eligible to vote in different elections.
Okay, and I think David also asked, is there a time limit on registering as well? So if someone could just confirm that for us.
My understanding, unless somebody tells me the otherwise, our limit is June 2021 in terms of individuals having gone through the system, as it were. So I don't think that position has changed. That certainly was the position as we moved into the kind of COVID pandemic. I don't believe, unless anyone looks at me otherwise, that position has altered.
Paul, you've got your hand up. Is there any, has it altered, or are you coming in on that?
Thank you, Chair. It hasn't altered, but I think it's worth bearing in mind that some EU nationals would have received pre-settled status, and then once they meet the eligibility criteria, would then be able to apply for settled status. So a number of EU nationals would need to apply twice and make use of the settlement scheme on 2 occasions before they actually achieve settled status. And my understanding is that that can continue beyond the 30th of June, provided that they've applied and they've received pre-settled status before that date, and there is then a 2-year period for them before they can apply for settled status.
Thanks. Does that clarify that for you, David?
Yeah, no, that's very helpful. Thank you.
Thanks. And Maria, I'll come over to you now.
Thank you very much, Chair. A couple of questions, if I may. The first question, which I'm really concerned about, it is the children who were born during the period of the lockdown and immediately after the lockdown, mainly of parents which are not English nationals. They need to register the birth in order to get a birth certificate, in order to get a passport, and in order to be able to travel abroad. A lot of people need to travel abroad and they are unable until now, until last week, so I understand, to get a birth certificate register. Do you know what is going to happen and when will it resume the normal service of registration?
Chair, I can answer that, although it is not really related to the work of the Brexit
Well,
panel.
it is.
Let's answer it anyway, because it's a question that's been asked. So,
yes.
Yeah.
So the first thing to clarify is births are registered in the local authority where the birth occurred. So St Thomas's Hospital and King's College Hospital are both located within the Lambeth registration district and will therefore be registered by Lambeth. Once birth registrations were resumed by central government, we've had an arrangement in place with Lambeth where our registrars have been able to register births on behalf of Lambeth as a service to Southwark residents. And we are now up to date on those registrations. And I understand that Lambeth is up to date on their registration, so they're now accepting appointments for births that took place in November. So there shouldn't be any further delay on applying for passports. Even through the pandemic, when birth registrations were deferred, if there was a pressing need, for instance, if there was a requirement to travel, then a birth could be registered during the pandemic. And I know that there were a number of births registered in both Lambeth and Southwark and many other local authorities where there was an urgent need. But I believe that we are now up to date.
Okay, thank you for answering. And the reason why I ask, and it is part of the Brexit, is because the majority of the people I'm talking about are European residents or Latin Americans with European passport, and they are trying to return to the country. And the other thing is, the other question is, when do you think that the free movement will start? The stop to the free movement will start? because I have an awful lot of people who are of Latin Americans with European passports, which are arriving by the dozens into this country, and they think that they are going to settle in here, and they think that they are going to get all and everything else. And it's a real concern, because if there were a couple or there were a dozen, perhaps, but there are hundreds of people arriving all the time. And as you say, they need to register for the pre-settle and then the settlement. And these people are doing none of those things.
Who is anyone able to answer that one?
Chair, shall I answer?
Yep.
It's my understanding that free movement ends at the end of the transition period. So that's the 31st of December.
That's what I thought.
This year. The settlement scheme is open for another 6 months. So an EU national living in the UK can apply for settled status for another 6 months, but the free movement will end on the 31st of December.
Thank you very much.
Thanks. Do you have any more questions, Maria?
No, that's all. Thank you.
Okay, I'm going to move over to Richard now because he's got his hand up.
Thanks, Steph. Yeah, I'm muted. At risk of sounding incredibly bourgeois, we have a German au pair, which is essential for childcare. And what's been very interesting is that the number of au pairs available to families in South London, or indeed all of London, in fact, the whole country, has plummeted over the last couple of years. Where this is relevant is that our au pair did apply for settled status, and it found the process relatively straightforward. That was a sample size of 1, so I don't think we should draw too much to come from that. But she also had to go and apply for a passport because it never occurred to her to actually need one. But I think that the bigger issue here is that obviously this is a very effective form of childcare for people with young families, and there are going to be many people who are going to struggle to obtain that, with the knock-on effects for employment and equality, because it will default to women to do most of the childcare. So the point of this is, what, if anything, can we do to address what has been enjoyed for decades as a relatively straightforward way of childcare? And then a subsequent and completely different follow-up question. Obviously, we've been doing a lot of communication with businesses over the last 6 months or so in handing out or administering the government's recovery funds for businesses. Is that a channel that we can use to talk to businesses in the borough about whether they have any issues around retention of staff or access to markets, to try and build up a picture of how the end of free movement of goods and people at the end of this month is going to impact on them?
Would that, Stephen Gaskell, would that be better for you to answer that one? Yeah.
Yeah, I was going to say on Richard's second point in terms of using our channels, absolutely, Richard. Yeah, that's certainly something that we would want to do anyway. We've obviously got so the business forum, we've got the bids network, etc. So using those channels and hearing from businesses to help inform our approach is absolutely spot on. So it's just to kind of, the answer to that is a yes. I would say. I don't know if Anya wanted to come in on anything more broadly on the comms bit, but a yes going forward. Yeah.
I suppose the only thing worth adding on the comms side is obviously we've had increased communication with businesses over this period, and we're Stephen's team is kind of managing, we're sharing regular updates on kind of COVID kind of updates and restrictions and support, and that's been a really effective channel. So we definitely do have kind of good channels to link in with businesses. So yeah, absolutely, it makes sense to use those to be both kind of sharing messaging around Brexit, but also getting that information back about what some of the concerns and issues are.
Great, that's great. So I just got I just want to pick up on something that Stephen Douglas, that you mentioned when you were sort of going through your part of the report. The fact that you are seeing residents come into the COVID community hub asking about settled status around that. And I think it sort of ties in with the fact that, yes, there's an app and people can download it, the issues we've got with the registrar service at the moment. But how can we reach, given that we've seen during this pandemic the extent of digital exclusion, and how hard some people are finding it to get online and just don't have the technology to be able to apply. How are we doing anything to be able to reach our more vulnerable EU residents, or are we literally just waiting until they maybe turn up at one of our hubs or one of our food banks to say, I really need help with this? But is there any sort of work that's being done on the ground that could help support that?
There is some. It's very, very difficult stuff to do. We're working with voluntary sector partners, with the advice agencies, and they can provide a whole range of advice and support in various ways. Obviously, they've been impacted by COVID in terms of how people access that advice. But it's very difficult because there are people there who don't necessarily come to us for support. So we're going through those other routes, but it's quite difficult to do.
And have we got sort of any sort of guidance or information for any of our community hubs, that if somebody does approach them and say, I need help with this, of where they can go to or signpost them to?
There is, and certainly those in our contact centre have a list of agencies that can provide a whole range of different forms of advice, whether that's immigration or anything else. So there is some out there.
Okay, so that's reassuring to know that if someone does turn up, then they can be signposted. Paul's just put something in the chat that if it helps, he can provide devices to be used at the community hubs, etc. So I don't know if you two want to talk amongst yourselves after this to see how that might work out and how that could help support things. Yeah, okay. Does anybody have any more questions on the main report? Okay, David.
Chair. Well, it's just sort of, I just wanted to be reminded, so the part of the report that refers to the Shared Prosperity Fund, and which is going to replace the EU Structural Fund. And I think, Stephen, you were saying that the announcement is that it's going to be the same figure, the 1.5 billion that we were previously getting as a country. Can you remind me, how do you actually apply for that? Is that something that the local authority applies for? And for example, how much were we getting this year or on previous years? And what do we normally spend the money on? And what have we got any thoughts about, from what the announcement is, about how we might spend future monies? And will we be, is it London, that do we apply at a London level or do we apply at a borough level?
Shall I take that, Chair?
Yes, please.
Yeah, David. So yeah, that 1.5 billion, it matches the European funding sources, things like ERDF, ESF, absolutely. Yeah. Majority of that is managed through London, yeah, so it's done on a London-wide scale. We have no details on what the criteria, application process, etc., would look like for Shared Prosperity Fund, obviously, but in the past year and to date, the London applications, the European monies have been managed on a London-wide scale, and we would apply on that basis, and then kind of the money is distributed accordingly. So and it depends on the nature of the funding source as well. So you know, it would depend whether it's ERDF, whether it's ESF, etc. I think it's very difficult, if I'm honest, Chair and members, to be able to map how our existing funding application process, need assessments and all of that would map onto a UK Shared Prosperity Fund. So I think it's very difficult for us to say, because of how things are run on a European basis, that will map neatly onto Shared Prosperity Fund. But yeah.
Okay, because interestingly, I saw a sign when I was walking through my ward the other day, which talked about, it seemed to be related to the, well, it almost felt like it was related to the low traffic network, and it said but you know, EU funds, and I'm thinking I'm not sure this is right, or I don't know. It all seems a bit strange.
No,
is it?
It is right. Yeah, there was a little bit of the fund that was able to be used for social distancing where it was needed.
Right. Well, there you go.
On the basis that it was advertised that it was that as well. I think we got about £300,000 as a local authority to do it on some of our high streets.
Oh, okay. But can anyone give, because I have to say I feel a bit bad asking the question, but I mean, can anyone think of any ways that we have previously benefited from EU money in Southwark? Because I'm not sure that I'm always quite clear how much money we've been getting and where it's been spent.
In the past, European money has been used to fund, for example, employment support work as well, David. So that's been used in terms of supporting people into employment, where we've been doing joint work with other London authorities. It's supported adult learning type activities as well. So some work around skills there. It's done that. Lots of capital funding in terms of some of the major schemes across London have been supported using ERDF, which would link in again to some local schemes. What that looks like specifically, yeah, don't have that in front of me. But yeah, there's a range of activities where European monies would have funded both small and larger scale projects on a kind of borough but multi-borough scale basis.
And sorry, final question. Can we? I mean, is there a role for us to be sort of aggressive in bidding for some of this new shared prosperity fund, in the sense of, do we have to put in lots of applications, a bit like CGS to the London Mayor, and try and make sure that Southwark gets more than its fair share, or does it not work like that?
As I said, the criteria in the process for accessing Shared Prosperity Fund is not set out yet, David. But you raise an interesting point as a panel in terms of that might be an area of focus around how do we make sure that we maximise the use of an access to Shared Prosperity Fund going forward, and where we might want to target our efforts there, both locally but also perhaps with other London boroughs too. I can see Stephen's got his hand up though, so
yeah, I was going to say, Stephen, if you wanted to come in on that as well.
Yeah, just to add on that funding point, the other area, of course, is research. And the council has been involved in European Union funded research projects and various things, including migration, community cohesion, things like that. But of course, also universities benefit from that. So there's an impact there that impacts on Southwark as research funding changes.
Yeah.
So quite a wide and varied remit for it, from widening streets to universities. Around that, but I do think that it's helpful to once we know, you know, what the Shared Prosperity Fund, what the parameters are, and what the process is, and what sorts of things we could potentially bid for, if that could come back to a future meeting, if all members are agreeable to that. Okay, brilliant. Richard, you've got your hand up.
Yes, thanks, Steph. Just going back to the section of the report on the 11 to 13 on the negotiations and impact on Brexit. I mean, clearly we will be finding out in the next few days and days whether or not there is a deal and what it looks like and precisely how bad it's going to be. Have we been able, do we have the resources to quantify the impact of a deal or no deal on Southwark, and are we able to publicise that on a sort of granular level? I know there's plenty of people who'll be looking at it on a nationwide level, but can we do it on a Southwark-wide level?
Who wants to take that one?
I could take that. I think it will be really challenging, Councillor Lehman, to kind of look at that at a very granular level in terms of the impact of a deal, because certainly in the short time scale between now and January, because obviously the negotiations continue, and then it will be a case of trying to untangle what are the implications on the London-wide scale versus then a very Southwark specific scale. But we would obviously want to work with bodies like Central London Forward, like London councils on that, because clearly it is important to understand what is the London-wide impact too. But I think it would be challenging to get down to a granular level of detail as you take, because there'll be some aspects of the negotiation which have absolutely limited to no implications for Southwark on some of the things, like, for example, around the port, around the fisheries type stuff, agriculture, not huge, but yeah, there'll be others where the implications for London are more significant. But being very honest, it will be very difficult to get down to granular borough-wide specific impacts. And again, I don't know whether Stephen or Anya or Paul, in fact, want to add anything there.
The only thing I'd add to that, of course, has been the earlier work of this panel and the evidence that was taken from people across sectors, including business, industry, universities and healthcare and others. But of course, a lot of that evidence was given in the context of lots of uncertainty. So no definitive information on what those and what the changes would actually mean. And to some extent, that situation hasn't moved on really.
And I just thought that the reason we had the meeting held for today is that we really thought that potentially we might have had a deal or know if we were going to have a deal or not by now. We sort of left it as long as we could. You know, it was around that. It was originally going to be in October, and then they had the extension, and then we thought, oh well, it's the 15th of November, so if we do it on sort of the last week of November, we should be in a better position of knowing where we are in terms and giving enough time for papers. But you know, the government being the government, we are still no nearer to knowing what a deal will be, or indeed if there is going to be a deal around that. Yeah, I think all we do know is that come the next meeting, which will be in the new year, the transition period would have ended around that. Does anybody have any more questions or comments around the report at all? No. Okay. So yeah, David. Yeah.
Sorry.
That's all right. Don't worry.
No, it was just about the 2 point. I don't know. We're coming on to it, but the 2.3 million that we've put aside in the risk reserve, and just about whether there's any more thought about, because we certainly discussed in some of the earlier meetings about, you know, whether we could give some additional money perhaps to, I think, Southwark Law Centre and some of the organisations that were supporting EU nationals with the EU settlement status, etc. I mean, have we spent any of that money, or are we still thinking about how that money might be used? Is there any early ideas about what we would do, or are we just waiting to find out exactly what's going to happen?
So I don't think well, Steve, anyone correct me if I'm wrong with this. I don't think we've spent any of it yet, and I think the whole idea was to see what the impact of, you know, what the impact will be, and what the deal would look like or no deal would look like before we sort of decided that. But I think you're right. I think we do need to start thinking about what support, and especially as we're hurtling out, aren't we? We're really hurtling out of it. We can't sugarcoat it in any way, I don't think, around that. So I think, can we get that maybe as an item for discussion for the next agenda? But I think it's something I need to take away and talk to Councillor out as well with Duncan Whitfield about sort of exactly how much is there, and what sorts of things we could potentially, you know, what's the availability around it as well. But some ideas. I think the next session is really, we could touch on it there as well, because I think if we lead now into the next session, I really am keen that we look at work streams for the forthcoming meetings. The reason I want to do that is that I think previous meetings we were looking at Brexit preparedness, we were looking at the risks to Southwark, we were looking at all the pre-Brexit stuff that we had to do as a local authority. And I think this is the only meeting we're going to have with this newly formed sort of membership of the committee, whilst we're still in a transition period. All the other meetings will be after we've exited properly from it. So it'd be really good to have maybe a bit of a brainstorm and a chat about things that we specifically want to focus on as themes for meetings, things that we want to look at, and things that we want to be brought to this committee or panel. It's a panel, but I'm going to call it committee because it's the same thing. On that. So really it's facilitating an open discussion around that. So I don't know, David, is there anything else you want to talk about the funding, about any things? I mean, you've mentioned Southwark Law Centre. Is there anything in particular you think that we should be looking at in terms of what we could potentially use that funding for?
Yeah, well, I mean, the obvious one right away, I guess, is obviously the transition will be coming to an end at the end of the year. So and with this deadline for some people, although not all people, of I think it was the end of June, was it the beginning of June, to get your settled status, then it feels like there's some work to be done around supporting and advertising and reminding people. I mean, I presume and hope that the government will be doing some of this as well, but it feels like sometimes we do things better locally than they do it nationally. So as we've seen with test and trace, so it feels like the Southwark having some sort of campaign or publicity and reminders to people about the deadline would be helpful to, and supporting people who, for whatever reason, are struggling to get their settled status, and that may be best done through Citizens Advice Bureau and Southwark Law Centre and organisations like that. So I would think we would probably want to release some money fairly early in the new year to around that area. Seems an area to, but I'm sure there are other things that are needed as well. But
yeah, and I mean, when you're talking about sort of publicity and campaigns, I mean, the only publicity or campaign that I've seen from central government at the moment is the one for businesses around that to get ready. Which you sort of think, hold on a minute, they're in lockdown at the moment. At the time, they didn't know what tier they were going to get into, depending on what part of the country you're in. And you're also asking businesses to now jump through hoops to get ready for whatever may happen, without knowing if there's a deal or not, or what the impact is going to have on it. But that is the only campaigning that I've seen from central government, to be honest, around that. So I think, yes, and settled status was one of the things that I really wanted to look at amongst our work streams as well. Absolutely, publicity, how do we get the message out there to people, but also how do we overcome the actual problems of COVID that are preventing that small number of people who do need that face-to-face support as well around it. So as well, so I'm think that we do need to do something around settled status, absolutely, on that. What that looks like, I'm not sure yet, but I'm absolutely with you on that one, around that. Richard, you've got your hand up as well.
Yeah, I mean, I've been thinking about this in the run-up to this panel, and I suppose the question I haven't been able to answer for myself is, what is our area of responsibility, expertise? What is it that we can bring to this conversation as a council that other organisations can't? And I think we need to identify that before then working out how we spend these very limited resources. Because, I mean, is it that we are best placed to communicate with our residents, or is it that we are best placed to understand our business needs, or is it that we are best placed to protect vulnerable citizens? Because it strikes me that £2 million is a lot, but in the grand scheme of things isn't very much. So we need to absolutely ensure that we're spending that effectively, and I think so therefore working out how it can best be spent, rather than sort of picking out something here or there, which other actors in this tragedy may be better prepared to deliver. I mean, that's an open question because I can't understand it. So I'd really like to hear from officers where they think we are best equipped to help.
Yep. Does anyone want to pick that one up?
I'm happy to kind of start off, and I think the point about communications with residents, again, because I think the experience of COVID has proved that having that really localized communication on key messages where we can have impact and how people can respond has proved really impactful. And I think the work that we've done to date in kind of sending out the messages around what does this mean has been important. So from my perspective, on the basis of what we know, and Stephen and Anya and Paul may want to add, on the basis of what we know and where we can have good impact is around some of that communication and messaging. On business need, it's as I say, it's quite tricky at this point, Richard, simply because we don't know the details of the deal and the ins and outs of the deal, and it'll be very different, and that'll take some working through before we understand where can we have greatest impact. Where we're likely to is supporting smaller businesses, but what that actually looks like yet is really, really tricky. So I think there needs to be a period of time of analysis and assessment before you get into that. It's just very difficult to say, oh, in the next fortnight or next month, these are the businesses that we think will be most impacted. What can we do to support them? Where's our part? I think that's a question that is really difficult to answer in the short term. And then looped into the residents is are there particular groups that are going to be detrimentally impacted as a result of the changes? And again, because we're quite closely connected to our communities through the VCS, that again might be that area where we're able to kind of have impact at a kind of reasonably low level of cost, but greater impact in terms of supporting individuals who may have levels of vulnerability, whether that's to do with language or other factors. So that would be my kind of response, just from a where can the council play its part best, relative to, as you eloquently put it, other actors in the tragedy, I think you said. So yeah. But Anya, Stephen, Paul, I don't know whether there's anything you'd want to add.
Just on communications, I think, Stephen's highlighted that. I think, again, COVID has really demonstrated the kind of need and impact of our kind of local communications directly with residents. And I think we have some really effective channels for getting messages out to residents. And actually, we've seen a growth in things like our email newsletters, mailings to residents, and we've seen really good kind of response rates on those. Obviously, a lot of that messaging has been targeted on COVID, but those are really effective channels. We also had obviously developed some kind of communications materials around the EU settlement scheme, but also the broader message of Southwark being open and the council wanting residents to stay in the borough. So we have those kind of materials that we can use, and as using our kind of existing channels, like things like our email newsletters, we can be quite effective with digital marketing at relatively low cost, and that's quite an effective way of being able to target that messaging and help to reach residents, and that's kind of on the broad kind of reminding people about the settlement scheme, encouraging people to apply. And I think as Steph said, it doesn't feel like that's an area that the government really is doing a huge amount of communication on, and so that does feel like something that we can be quite effective on.
And I'd just echo that our closeness to and understanding of our communities, those challenges, those channels that we and our partners, VCS and elsewhere, can use, faith organisations and others we have good relationships with, and central government can't do that at all. So I think that's a great strength, and of course that there are some really big issues here that sadly we don't have the power to deal with. So you'll have seen the stuff in the press about the queues of lorries in Kent when they were trying out the additional checks at the border, the potential impacts that has on food and food security. And we do work around food security, but we can't fix the whole infrastructure that's impacted by all of this. So focus on communities, our closeness to communities, our communication with communities. And this is where it's a shame that there wasn't a lot more engagement with local authorities. Our feedback to central government about exactly what the impacts and how our communities were feeling about all of this.
And Paul, you've got your hand up. Did you want to add anything?
Yeah, just anecdotally, the information provided by a local authority is probably trusted by residents far more than messaging that comes from central government, because there is a feeling that local authorities have got the interests of residents at heart, whereas central government may have a slightly different agenda.
I know David's got his hand up, but can I just come back on a couple of ideas that have occurred to me during this? Thank you for those. Those responses.
This one is I want to sort of It's pretty free-form discussion rather than sort of rigid.
So for Anya's benefit, I mean, I come from a communications background. I was a journalist for a long time, and my last piece of work I was doing before I did that was looking at a comms strategy. So I can completely understand where you're coming from, and it's good to hear that the comms strategy for a local government client. So this is good to hear, and I agree with it. I'm thinking as well that I know that Councillor MacDonald, Alice, is drawing up a new digital comms strategy. Is this not something that we should be working explicitly with her? And then a second thought occurred to me, and this is there a way that we can sort of prioritize different? I mean, I always use audience groups, but residence groups that we might want to try and take practical help for, be they school children or vulnerable communities of one sort or another. I mean, there's plenty of different sort of groups of people that who exist in our borough, and if I can segment and prioritise them in some way so that we can target our response much more effectively.
Do you want me to come back in on that? Yeah, absolutely. I think that those are definitely points that we can pick up. And yes, we are working closely with Councillor MacDonald. And in terms of kind of that more specific targeting, I think that's certainly something that we can look at. And actually, if the panel's keen to discuss this as kind of an issue in more depth, it would be helpful to get along our head of comms to maybe the next panel meeting.
I think that'd be a good idea. Is everyone else on the panel happy for that to take place? Yeah, great. I sort of want to make the panels as sort of far-reaching as possible to be able to sort of bring in as many sort of parts of the council together as well, so we get that overview and overall sort of look at the direction of travel of what we can do. I suppose up till now, up to sort of before lockdown, because I mean it's been a long time, as I said, since we last met. Before lockdown, I think it's fair to say the priorities we were looking at were obviously the impact on residents, the impact on businesses, and the impact on the council itself. I just want to touch on the third one because we haven't really we've spoken a bit about business, we've spoken quite a bit about residents, but we haven't spoke about what we feel the impact in depth, the impact on what the council is going to be. I mean, I know that we were looking at supporting our own staff who are EU citizens through this. It'd be really good, Stephen, Douglas, if we could get just a verbal update now on how that's going. Have we managed to support everybody through that? And sort of what do we think the potential impact of transit, when the transition period ends, what do we think are the main concerns for us as a local authority, the risks that we need to be wary of and look out for?
Just on that staff piece, Chair. Yeah, I mean, there was support. There were road shows around various locations where staff were present, and there were fairly good levels of take up of that. So that I think worked really well. That support is still available, and the messages are still there for staff. Obviously, COVID's had an impact on that as well, because there are many staff who aren't coming into offices or other places of work, but that's still available for any who need it. We had the same difficulty, I think, as was mentioned earlier, that because there wasn't a reason to collect particular nationalities of staff, we didn't necessarily have data on how many were non-UK EU citizens, because there wasn't a reason legally or otherwise to do so, which didn't help us. But despite that, there were good levels of take up and a decent support offer there for staff, which is still available for anybody who wants it. In terms of wider impacts on the council, I mean, some of these we haven't seen yet. The procurement stuff, the fact that pick an example. If you're working in housing and housing repairs, lift parts are sourced from Germany. So there's an awful lot of work done with suppliers in terms of their own resilience. And of course, that's ongoing stuff as the situation unfolds. So there's a whole set of impacts there as well on how we do business. Will it potentially become more expensive, and so on? Or will it be more difficult to acquire those parts, and so on?
And this, I really don't know the answer to this. This is why I'm asking. Maybe I should know the answer, because a lot of our procurement that we do goes through the ODU process, doesn't it? And what is replacing that, and when does it come into force, and how does it work? I know there's 3 questions about one thing, but I really don't know. Does anyone know? No. So basically, nothing's been. Do we not know because we don't? I suppose what I'm saying, do we not know because the government haven't actually figured it out yet?
I think there's something in that, Steph. I think, but what we certainly can do, particularly on the ODU, some of the procurement points, we can go back to colleagues in procurement and just double kind of check what the latest position is. But I do think there's something in the fact that there is still some uncertainty from a kind of government position, which ties back into this earlier conversation about some of this granularity attached to the implications of the negotiation. But we can check the position, Steph, just to see whether we can answer that very specific question. I see Paul's got his hand.
Yeah, Paul, do you want to come in?
Yeah, just on another point with my information governance hat on, the exchange of data between the UK and EU companies, organisations, countries will be affected because the UK would need to obtain an adequacy statement from the EU, and until that is obtained, sharing of data is going to be really difficult. Now, I'm not sure how much data is shared between Southwark and the EU, but it is something that the council may need to have a look at.
Okay, right. I'm just wondering if that's something that we want, because I think it is important. It's important to know the impact it's going to have on the council and the procurement side of it, because the procurement things that we procure affect our residents and around them. They are services for residents. So I'm just wondering, and sort of to the four, so Richard, Maria, and David, whether it'd be helpful, if you think it'd be helpful to maybe have a discussion and a report on the impact on the procurement process once we sort of know where it is and what's happening on that at a future meeting, because it is a big thing, isn't it, really, when you think about it, all the different services we procure.
Yeah,
we'll be talking about procurement in the light of EU regulations having gone and either replaced or not replaced by national ones.
Yeah. And the impact that's going to have on our services and our ability as a local authority to be able to procure and tender. And what does that mean? Is there going to be an additional cost? Are there going to be additional hoops? Is all the EU red tape and bureaucracy really going to go and be replaced by some UK red tape and bureaucracy around it? And I don't know. I just feel that I think I'd like to get a grip on what the implications of it would be on our cross-council procurement services, especially for those services where we're looking at big contracts that affect very, very vulnerable residents. Because I mean, we've been talking about EU residents and the impact and the risk and the worry they have. But there is the other side of things where actually the changes to procurement and the changes to legislation that will come in with the big, I don't know if the big Henry VIII Act is still going to happen, but yeah, the impact on that is going to impact all of our residents and our most vulnerable residents as well, regardless of their sort of citizenship on that. So I just think it'd be good to get an understanding of that, and maybe Doreen could come to a future meeting to talk about the impact on the procurement process and frameworks. Stephen, you've got your hand up.
Yes, Chair. I was just going to say, might it be helpful if, so obviously we'll know more from the negotiations, and then as you say, there's the super bill, which off the top of my head I can't remember the title of it, which wraps up all the positions certainly going into COVID. We've all gone a bit COVID because it's literally always at the front of our minds at the minute. But yeah, certainly prior to that, the idea was that would all be wrapped up, and in effect EU legislation comes across. So it may well be that some of some areas where there are not issues, but I wonder whether it would be helpful if we went back to Doreen just to say, is the position as was still the case, and are there any areas of concern that are known to us, and kind of ask her to just do some of that quick analysis, with the idea then of coming back with further details on any implications in terms of service procurement. But I think the first thing is just an analysis of what is the legislation, what is the change, and therefore are there any gaps emerging from that? And there might be some unknowns within it, but would that be helpful?
You're right. I think there will be unknowns. There's always going to be unknowns, but there's the known unknowns, isn't there? And the unknown unknowns. But there will also be the things that we do know, and can we pinpoint from that any immediate things that we need to flag up for potential risk? And if so, what is the solution to it? Okay. Maria, is there anything you'd like us to sort of look at in future meetings?
Well, it's something very interesting that I went just now to get that I received this morning. It is from the Department of Business and Energy and Industrial Strategy, and it was directed to the charity that I run. And it says, for example, you need to act now is urgently that you tell us if you are going to recruit or thinking of recruiting, or you have already people employed that come from the EU. And the final date of informing that is the 1st of January 2021. Then recruiting from overseas also starts on the 1st of January 2021. If I buy things from Europe and I have any transactions with other companies in Europe, that will need to be again 1st of January 2021, when these things will change, except Northern Ireland. So that is quite a long paper, especially on those things. And I think it is important to inform the local businesses of these things, what the council thinks, and how can we help? Because a lot of people will not understand, and they will panic because it says, look, it says act now, and it's all very big, and a lot of people panic. And they think, what do I need to do next? Am I breaking the rules? Am I not supposed to do this? Do I tell them or do I not tell them? It's all these things that I think we need to explain to the people, to the small business, the small companies, including charities, because that was addressed to my charity.
So I can get my mute button. Yeah, I think that's a really valid point. And as you were speaking, Maria, I was thinking there are so many small charities that this will, and businesses as well, that this will really worry. It's like it is. I mean, when you show that heading, it's really quite sort of in your face, isn't it? And I can imagine sort of big massive sirens going act now on it. It's that sort of impact on it. So absolutely we do need to look at that, don't we, and see how, and as I said, I think that ties in a bit with the government have got a campaign at the moment for businesses, but it's not really saying much at all. The adverts on television really aren't saying a lot at all. They're just saying do this by the end of the year. But it's not really, yeah, exactly.
Well, it's already December next week, you see.
Yeah, I know, I'm watching it and I'm thinking, hold on a minute, most businesses are worrying about how they're going to open up on the 2nd of December, or if they can open up on the 2nd of December. You know,
adding to
and
another
get
worry
through to the Christmas period, let alone this. And I just think, and I've said it all along, and Stephen and Anya know this because I say it all the time, so I like stuck record. But I really do believe that the government are going to downplay the effect of COVID on businesses, and sorry, Brexit on businesses, and say it's all due to COVID, and that none of it is down to Brexit, or only a minute amount is down to Brexit, and actually disguise it by COVID. We know that's going to happen. Yeah. Around it. So I think there's some really good points that have come out of that. So sort of, Stephen, if you took a note of those, I mean, we've got the record that we can play back if we need to, as well on that. Is there anything else that anyone would has got a burning desire that we really need to look at, or are we happy to sort of come?
One more thought, Steph. So I was in a bike shop the other day waiting to pick my bike up, and the phone rang and the person answered it, and it was very clearly someone cancelling their order, inquiring where their order was, and then ended up cancelling their order because the excuse given by the bloke in the bike shop in East Dulwich was that the part was stuck at Felixstowe. Because it just hadn't arrived yet. So I think, you know, bike shop not necessarily a problem, but this does lead me to suspect that there's going to be significant issues around importation of pretty much anything. You know, we import a significant amount of our food, and, you know, stockpiling has always been a concern. Again, given what we did with the food hubs at the start of at COVID, is there scope for keeping that alive to store food for schools, for instance? We've had lots of conversations about feeding children over the last few weeks, but I mean, if we are having problems accessing food to give those free school meals to children, could we be using our properties to start a warehouse for food for the schools in the borough?
Yes, and also to all people.
Yeah, and all people, yeah.
So I'm looking at, I know you can't see me looking at you, Stephen Douglas, because we're not in a room, but I'm looking to you on that one. Is that a possibility? I mean, I know that we're going to be having the community hubs for the foreseeable future with COVID, but is there capacity as well if it was felt that it got to the situation where, you know, food supplies aren't coming through, that that we could look to do something like that?
The issue, I mean, that arrangement remains in place. So if people are in desperate need of food, we can meet that need. Depends on the scale. The issue, because the way it was working was stuff was coming in and going straight out, being delivered to people, would be stockpiling and storage, and it then becomes, what's the capacity in other people's warehouses to be doing all of that? So it's quite difficult stuff for us to do at scale. And if what you're talking about is building up a stockpile of food, should there be an issue, then that's more difficult to achieve.
Yeah. Okay. So I mean, we have gotten to 8 o'clock, but I'm sensing that people would rather have a bit of an evening after finishing. I read the minutes from yesterday, and apparently we finished at 10:45 last night. So it's so. I think.
I also have another meeting, Chair, actually, so I was about to give my apologies in a moment.
No worries. So I'm going to wrap it up in a second to say that we've got some really good things back at the next meeting to discuss further. I think the priorities are looking at the what that shared prosperity fund would look like and how we replace that, how we can resolve some of those issues around EU settled status. I'm wondering, but I'll take this offline with Stephen and Anya.
And an update on the if we have any update on the shared prosperity funds.
Yeah, that's what I said. Yeah, on that. Yeah. I'm thinking I may just write to the relevant ministers around any issues we're seeing around sort of the impact of COVID on people being able to register as settled status, and whether the government can sort of look at alternatives around that anyway. So I could take that on board. I'll also look at, we can also think about looking at that funding and what is needed around that, and then absolutely getting the procurement stuff ready and sort of thinking about how can we actually campaign which Anya said, we've got a really good way of sort of insight and input into that to make sure that residents and businesses are aware of what they need to do after the 31st.
Would it also be possible if to potentially get a sort of an update from some of the big employers, particularly like the health service and things like that, about, you know, what problems and impacts they're experiencing in relation to workforce?
Yeah, and we can probably get the bids as well, because I meet with the bids every week actually. So we can probably see, Stephen himself can talk to the bids and see what impact it's having on some of their big organisations as well.
Would the Ernst & Young's over the other side of Tilley Street have an interesting thing to say as well? Because they'll be tapped into their national networks.
Yeah, I think so. I think we the impact on that, and we've got contacts that we can speak to, don't we, Stephen, around those larger businesses through the business forum as well.
Yeah, they're on the business. Yeah, they're on the business forum. That's right, Steph. Yeah.
There is something else, Stephanie, that I am concerned, and I think we need to speak with the housing department, especially Ian Swift. It is the enormous amount that worries me, because I get hundreds of phone calls all the time on Zoom and Omega of people who are in need of housing, and there are people who are coming in all the time, which is what I said at the beginning, and they are going to continue to come. They're asking me, you know, when is the last day that I'm allowed to come? When is the freedom of movement going to stop? And the amount of people that are in requirement of temporary accommodation, emergency accommodation, permanent accommodation, that is something that is going to impact the housing department a great deal. Not only if you don't have houses, you don't have houses and you can help, but it's only just the enormous amount of telephone calls that you are going to receive, the enormous amount of requests you are going to receive is something that I think that the housing department needs to be prepared.
Yeah, and we can touch base with Ian on that and see whether he can put something together.
I talk to him all the time. So he already knows from me. But I think that as the Brexit panel, we need to warn formally the housing department that there are problems on the foreseeable future.
We can do that, can't we? I mean, Stephen Douglas, you able to do? Yeah, brilliant. Okay. Thank you. Well, thank you, everyone. And I'm really sorry about the beginning. I managed to get my composure back. I was a bit flustered at the beginning because I was panicking, but I couldn't get into the meeting. It was really stressful, but thank you. And thanks, everyone, for your input. I think it's been a really productive meeting. And we'll get a meeting arranged probably in a couple of months, so maybe towards the end of January, once we sort of know, once we transition, we sort of start seeing the impact and around that as well. Does that sound okay for everybody?
Yeah.
Brilliant. Yeah. Okay, thanks. Well, have a good evening, everyone. Take care.
Yeah.
Bye.
Take care.
Bye.
That's all. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.